I'm dying. Help me.
So I want to come off the top and say that I don't make video essays. I don't think I compile my thoughts well, and I feel like I work better in a discussion setting. I say this as sort of a warning. Much of the dialogue here was had with myself, refined over, like, a few weeks or so, and was certainly impacted by memory. I might get a few details wrong here and there, but I stand by the core of my argument, which is this. I ask a lot of questions that might seem superfluous on the surface, but I believe asking these questions opens the world up for further exploration and offers more lore and quest opportunities that tie things together. My intention isn't to bitch about the game as it is, but more to discuss what could have been and what I'd personally like to see, as more of a personal backbone sort of, like, whatever. I don't think games of this scale should exist just yet, given how they can't be finished without crushing the team, but more on that later. Maybe. Finally, I want to say that Dying Light 2 is my favorite game, and I didn't set out to shit on it. It just kind of happened that way. Hopefully I'm wrong and I'm seeing the script through a more critical lens is all, but I do want better for Dying Light. Anyway, let's start off this Dying Light 2 video by talking about the atmosphere of Dying Light 1. Harran had burning cars, empty and disheveled storefronts, and lots of ambient music. These were a great backdrop to the gameplay. The apocalyptic elements of Dying Light 1 really made the environment of Harran feel desperate and dying. When a survivor blips on the map in Dying Light 1, I feel like I ought to help them. When it happens in Dying Light 2, I might help them for the loot, but if I'm after an inhibitor or I'm questing, I ain't gonna stop to slap around some renegades to save a PK that's probably gonna die when I accidentally kick the shit out of them. Accidentally. The reason for this hard split in the value of human life is because of this. In Harran, your only consistent method of interaction with other humans was to rescue them. This helped to tie the player to the world, with its desperate visuals feeding urgency to the player when someone calls for help. The gameplay helped to reinforce this theme as well, with the airdrops being stressed both by characters and the game's mechanics. The airdrops were a genius way of introducing a resource war, but keeping it in the background so as to keep gameplay focused, I'd imagine. They held food, flares, and antizin, a suppressant for the virus that was in very short supply even with constant airdrops. They'd happen at random intervals, and if you weren't quick enough to get to them, Ryze's goons would get there first, and you'd only get half the resources you otherwise could get. Oh yeah, Ryze was the main antagonist of Dying Light 1. Turning in airdrops also gave massive amounts of XP. That contributed to the legend levels after maxing out Crane's abilities, meaning they were valuable even in the late game. In Stay Human, the world feels much less desperate. I'm gonna be getting sick of that word in a minute. With nobody worried about surviving to tomorrow, instead complaining about either the PKs or nothing. Not only that, but Stay Human doesn't have an airdrop equivalent. Resources just aren't a concern in this world. I understand we're past the whole scavenging old fridges and grocery stores for food thing, but that's not my point. I'm on about how people in Villedor are able to keep a consistent supply of food, tools, and building materials without any supply lines or couriers. And before you say anything I know about the messenger, being that we talk to and kill so many people in this game, it's no longer novel when we see a survivor needs help. If this guy lives or dies, nothing feels different. Techland tries to put value on survivor encounters by offering high-level consumables for helping them. This feels weird given the story angle they pushed. Why would these guys be so willing to give me such valuable items? Immunity boosters in some cases, which cancel out the infection, making perfect sense when you rescue a guy from being overtaken by the infection at night. And it feels weird on the gameplay side, because if I could just craft these, why would I care? I feel like there's a missing population mechanic or something here. There are just as many visual elements that make Villedor feel post-apocalyptic, but when you're not looking directly at a faction structure, the world feels static in a strange way. There are signs of military occupation with tanks, APCs, really cool storage containers that some people live in. Large important structures like the VNC and electrical substations lie dormant. Churches are built up with scaffolding. Actually, there's construction equipment everywhere, but nobody's moving. The people of Villedor seem more keen to put in extra work sawing logs into planks than moving into any of these empty structures and improving them. They'd all rather build on top of these buildings than live in and around them. except in a few cases of characters during a few main and side quests. Pre-release material both shows and explains that the people of Villedor add on to these existing structures to make life more livable, but in the final game, the structures built by survivors and PKs alike both feel more like little islands than networks of paths made to make life more livable. It almost feels like all these apocalyptic touches are just for show, like the survivors are saying, "Look!" Should I do a Bill Clinton impression?
Yeah.
I'm gonna try. What does Bill Clinton sound like? He's like, look. Oh my God. Oh, look, we couldn't build here until you claimed this windmill in our name. Thank you so much, Aiden. I love you. So few people are willing to live in or build up the skeleton that remains of the city, preferring these strange new structures that will surely take loads of resources to make and maintain. In Harran, people lived in the existing buildings, adding fortifications like barbed wire, tires, and spike boards to keep the infected out. We don't see people moving through Villedor to push specific wares found only in one area, or different cultures coming about as a result of segregation via zombie. Structures are either similar or identical, with no sense of reason in some cases. How are the children supposed to get into this school? Do they live there? Sleep on the goats?
Goats!
While the city is decaying and weirdly static, it's not lacking in character. If you look at the models and textures that make up these structures and environments, they have an insane amount of detail. Almost no two walls look alike. There's so much detail that I stopped to read the posters on the walls of the bazaar and found a bunch of silly references and goofs. And that's just the bazaar. There's lots of thought put into the materials used on these structures, with drawer handles and paracords linking boards together. The farms and vegetation are super cool, looking super believable and giving legitimacy to the idea that life can totally carry on up here on the rooftops. Gourds are super easy to grow, so every farm has a pumpkin patch. And wheat is a grass plant, so it regrows if you don't pull it up from the root. There are tomatoes, potatoes, rice, eggs from chickens, milk and cheese from goats, probably meat on occasion, but only sometimes. I think it would have been cool if the people needed to go to the ground to gather some more robust lumber, as the thinner trees of the rooftops wouldn't cut it construction-wise. The detail isn't all in the life of the new world either. The city tells a very interesting story, sort of frozen in time. Ads are seen plastered over the building, selling all different kinds of fashion, food, and other comforts of the old world. One of my favorites is a chick with a mask on running. Tagline for the product is "Run like there is tomorrow." You know, like, don't worry, stay fit, buy this mask. Mr. Chicken Pie dares you to eat a whole spicy XXL. It'd be neat to see people advertising services in the new world, like this guy's really good at construction, or this chick can sing like an angel, or this other lady is a killer blacksmith. They all could have cool posters that tell you how to reach them. Here's a fun side note, look at all the ads on the walls of Dying Light 1. Those are awesome. The Hans movies have been getting sequels since Dead Island. That needs to be a poster that I can hang on my actual wall in real life now. Also, Super Mag the spin-off game win.
Bro, fight the power!
Gyms are all disheveled and gross. Some asshole didn't put their weights back before getting fried by the chemicals. Cars are missing tires, sometimes seats, windows, anything that could be repurposed without using a blowtorch was taken. Gas was likely siphoned out to fill the generators. I think I saw a few cars with hoses in their tanks. The half-life on gas is bullshit though, so I'd have liked to see a few quests surrounding a moonshine racket. Moonshine burns hot and fast, but it's an alternative to gasoline. Also, who was and is filling up these generators at the Night Runner camps? To mention Dying Light 1 again real quick, there are concert stages and signs of the Harran Olympics everywhere across both maps of the base game. I'd have liked to see landmarks like those in Villedor, like a concert stage that was raising money for kids that didn't have Xboxes or something, some old signs of protest calling for the government to give the guns back. There are loads of cool historic landmarks, like the monument in the park commemorating the lives lost at the Marsh Massacre, the old church of St. Paul Island, any of the art pieces in the city, that sick-ass graffiti. It's hard to pick a favorite with the graffiti. I want more story-relevant landmarks, not just to the story of the city, but to the events leading up to and following the fall. So the world of Dying Light 2 feels dead, right? This is both a good and a bad thing, both intentional and a consequence of zombies not being able to climb as high as the city allows us to get. You couldn't go anywhere in Harran without there being hordes of biters nearby. In Stay Human, there are large stretches of time that you don't even see any wandering dead about. You'll mostly be by yourself flying around on the paraglider, since nothing really moves on these rooftops. It wasn't until I came across a renegade outpost built into 2 different skyscrapers that I realized no one lives up here, and saw the potential for what life could be. The snaking bridges and ladders of this outpost are the most you get. Even capturing the VNC has no effect on life in the higher parts of the city. The music does help to alleviate this feeling of isolation up here, though, alongside the beautiful colors of the plant life. Moss grows on top of these buildings, alongside grass and vines, trees and flowers. They all help to bring life to the rooftops. This pairs well with the ambient music that plays when you're not moving. It evokes a feeling of serenity from my first playthrough that It evokes a feeling of serenity that hid the fact there's no intelligent life up here for my first playthrough. Music can do a lot for presentation, and both games have 10 out of 10 soundtracks by extremely talented people. I know everyone says that, but when you're in there and you feel the music controlling your emotions as well as Dying Light does, you really see the vision of the gameplay come together. It's easy to get lost in Dying Light's moment-to-moment gameplay, and especially so when you let the soundtrack do its job. I would say the musical tone of Dying Light 1 was desperation and fear. The music was mostly synth, with heavier sounds making up much of the horror moments. A lot of the music was tense and wrought with mystery. The track Passage comes to mind. It sounds like investigative music to me. Even the more tense songs like Now They're Coming serve as a warning with its constant tempo and subtle screeching. Listen closely and you'll hear heavy drums mimicking the sounds of infected beating down doors. Almost all the music sounds like you're hiding from a serial killer in an 80s movie. It's tense and threatening, and it lets the visuals and gameplay hit you while the music constantly threatens you behind them. Even the ambient tracks are masterful. The subtle droning synth keys in the slums are accompanied by higher ones on occasion, evoking a feeling of weariness. These are heard alongside an iconic vocal track of a man doing some cool throat singing. It's super ominous and made me feel like I was in a foreign land, isolated from help. There are lots of short ambient tracks for each main area, Old Town having the least. This doesn't mean that it has weaker tracks, though. The songs that play in this area were definitely crafted with the extra verticality in mind. The warbling synth makes this area feel just as desperate, but somehow elevated from the other places we see. The higher tones dance alongside the droning hum of the angelic sounds. The countryside has the most ambience, most of it sounding very tranquil while still evoking the feeling of fear and mystery. Maybe this is just me, but something about this music feels like a man in a noose, desperate for air. I almost feel suffocated by the sound. It feels like the countryside is grasping at whatever peace there is, but knows it's too late. The musical tone of Dying Light 2 feels very different, due in no small part to the dynamic tracks recorded for this game. Tracks recorded with instruments crafted to suit the world of Stay Human. The title screen song, Run, Jump, Fight, sets you up for an adventure, and it hides the main theme of the game in it. Most tracks in this game revisit the same sound, and that's why I've taken to calling it the game's main theme. The Mark is the track that puts it at the foreground. This is the sound you'll hear throughout the game at important story moments, while climbing tall structures, running, taking in the environment. It's a menacing song. I mostly prefer the tracks that play in the overworld, like the ones that kick in when you're running. These tracks feel alive in more ways than even the Doom soundtrack. They really feel like they're responding to you. The more speed you get, the louder the music becomes, but slow down and it fades out. Climbing to a high place, you can hear a determined track that only changes once you reach the highest point, where it fades into a softer, more ambient song. This ambience melts into a short collection of plinking strings, accompanied by the sound of rushing wind. Jump from that height, and the song narrows, sustaining a note that feels like it's holding its breath as it waits to see if you nail the landing. It's so subtle and creative, I love it. Moments like these go a long way to make it feel like Aiden has made it to the top of the world. Makes the dead city seem peaceful when viewed from so high up. While the atmosphere of Stay Human is different from the original, I'm not trying to argue that it's bad. What I will argue, though, is that the visuals and music betray the actual tone of the world. I've talked at length to this point about how this world doesn't feel as desperate as it wants the player to believe, and most of that comes from the story content being so weird. I'm gonna flesh that out here because I forgot to earlier. The map has these windmills you can scale to give a small portion of the city to either the Peacekeepers or the Survivors. If you unlock an area for the Survivors faction, they build fortifications and have farms set up after a short timeskip cutscene. These people seem immediately self-sufficient. They have everything they need right on this small cluster of rooftops. They don't need any additional tools, resources, they don't need any bodies or seeds. Hold on. Is Survivor a faction? What do these people stand for? How does one unite a group under the banner of survival? Where are these people coming from? They certainly aren't just wandering the streets, so are they living in the buildings? Do they all come from the fisheye and the bazaar? I don't think a single area has dialogue about overcrowding, and one outpost will never steal from or attack another for their resources. There is some dialogue from the Peacekeepers that mentions that the Survivors are chaotic and uncivilized. This probably has to do with the Lazarus situation in the first act, but it doesn't seem to make sense because after that's over, they'll keep saying this stuff. The Survivors seem to operate on the honor system, but when life is so cheap, that system fails immediately. I think I dealt with one quest that was a case of theft between survivors. You know, on self-sufficiency, I guess the same could be said for the Peacekeepers, but it's more believable that they wouldn't need help surviving given that they're a military organization and that they just take shit from people. Whatever. Alongside the new faction structures you unlock by assigning map objectives are new side quests. Give an outpost to the Survivors and side quests will pop up in that area. These quests are usually more personal than the Peacekeepers, having to do with solving a small mystery about some missing rice, locating a family member, or getting an old woman her medicine from some renegades that appeared nearby. The Peacekeepers might need help with more appropriate matters to the faction, like locating missing members, delivering orders to a unit on a small island, or taking down a renegade outpost. Alongside these side quests are some that appear regardless of who you side with. One that comes to mind is a man that can be found atop the apartments outside of the PKHQ. He needs help locating his son who ran away. Upon finding his son, it turns out he isn't related to the man at all, and the guy was just using him, among other children, for slave labor. Then there are the twins that try to grift you in a race. I provide another example, but I forgot, so I'm going to explain myself now. When it comes to the faction side quests, they have no real effect on either you or the faction you choose to do the job for. There's no reputation system, so helping one or the other faction isn't a give-and-take situation. In addition, you don't get any specialized equipment for helping. Neither major faction has anything unique to offer. Well, that's not true. Giving territory to the PKs helps with environmental combat through car traps, electric fences, and the like. Conversely, survivors will help with traversal by adding zip lines, jump pads, and such. We didn't help to gather the stuff to make these traps, and traversal seems only to benefit Aiden, making me feel like a reward for doing good work is more work, but this whole section is a personal matter and I'm being a baby. Worst of all, this is me getting back on track now. Worst of all, at least for me, neither faction will send you on a side quest that interacts with the other. PKs don't want you to kick an old woman out of her house for its strategic value. There aren't any PKs trying to recruit the youth of a survivor village by sabotaging their technology and resources. The survivors don't want you to assassinate a high-ranking PK. They don't want you to help set up a racket where they steal resources from the peacekeepers and then sell them back to them, or even to the renegades. The renegades don't get shit in this game either. They aren't a faction, they're an enemy type. The quests the major factions give you end up feeling like content for content's sake. They don't even tell good stories most of the time. I don't think a single character approaches the memorability of Ghazi. Yes, unfair to say that God doesn't have an equal, I know, but the point stands. The unaffiliated side quests can get a pass because they're more there to tell contained stories. A blanket issue I have with quests on the whole is that they all end happily. Save for a few examples, Aiden will complete the quest and everyone wins, thanking him and going right back to business as usual. Careful your eyes don't roll out of your head, I'm gonna make a comparison to New Vegas. Camp Forlorn Hope. It's a small NCR outpost that needs everything from bodies to bullets to medicine, and they aren't getting any of it. Their flag is flown upside down to indicate distress. If the courier does the side quests on offer in the area, making life better for the people stationed there, not only will you earn favor with the NCR, but the flag will then be flown right side up. Nobody mentions this flag detail in-game. It's just there for you to notice if you notice it. While New Vegas is an absolute masterpiece, I make this comparison to show what side quests could be. You could just as well leave these people to struggle, and if you do, using the NCR emergency radio will provide you with less and weaker soldiers to back you up. Not only that, but during the second battle of Hoover Dam, you can listen to a radio that tells you how Forlorn Hope is holding up against the Legion assault, and depending on what state you left them in, they have varying stages of success. It's so awesome. New Vegas rules. New Vegas is full of moments and quests that Stay Human doesn't approach. While Dying Light 1 didn't have anything quite on this level, with the stated focus on story and the hiring of Chris Avallone, who is my dad, I expected more than we got. I think we all did. COVID certainly kneecapped this game hard, but I'm not too terribly sure the story content would have been much better if COVID hadn't interfered, given the state of Bloody Ty's story. That gets its own video later though. Also, what the hell's happening here? Why is this whole string of buildings on fire? That's not in the game. A cool way to have side quests or city control impact the world could use the level design. That's not to say the level design is bad or even lacking, but what if certain areas of the city were especially difficult to navigate without the use of the cranes? Help the survivors and they'll add monkey bars, ropes, or slabs to set up more shortcuts by utilizing cranes. PKs can use cranes as weapons, putting cars or pendulums on them to swing loose when activated, in addition to the ones we have hanging from the traffic lights. The PKs can set up those turrets we see scattered about the world to defend checkpoints and stuff, instead of them just appearing weirdly. Maybe siding with the PKs all the way gives Aiden a portable version of the cannon. Maybe a sub-weapon. Maybe the PKs should offer more advanced tech on the whole. UV weapons, unique projectiles, traditional grenades and such. Survivor quests could reward Aiden with more abilities and storage space. PKs could max out inventory at like 20 slots or so, but the survivors could max it out at 40. Survivors could offer more lore than the PKs, more crafting components, more recipes for unique sub-weapons that harness the infection and stuff, alongside the transportation options they unlock. I wanted to believe this game would have a darker world, but it really doesn't. No matter what the dialogue or music will try to make you believe, this world is too simple to tell a compelling story, and I have a theory as to why that is. When making a game that has content like this that can be missed on a single playthrough, Most developers are too worried about players not experiencing the quest lines they worked so hard on. Most players won't even finish a game once, let alone twice or more to see the other endings. When you set your game up not to just have different endings, but also a different experience that calls for more than just 2 playthroughs, you lose like 98% of your player base. And there's the whole voice protagonist thing further conflating the issue of complexity. At that point, you're really only appealing to the superfans, and that pool is never deep enough to justify the millions of dollars you gotta pour into the content for that group of people. Business-wise, anyway, and I say that being among the group of superfans. I don't mean to imply that there's no passion to this game, its writing, or its world. I also don't mean to say that passion has no place in game development, or that Dying Light fans aren't rabid enough. No, we all know that isn't true. What I do mean to say is that the complexity inherent to making a game with a branching narrative is missing from Stay Human, and with a world and narrative so simple, with twists that have no consequences, the world falls flat. Gameplay-wise, there are no maps I'd rather play in. The decorated alleyways and other unremarkable areas of GTA 5 are empty space that Villador also has, but due to the nature of Dying Light, we use these alleyways to navigate and fight. There's so little empty space in this world, it's so fun to explore and run through. My problem is incentive. Not content exactly, but context. The characters of Haran were fun, so we accepted that Dying Light 1 didn't have a great narrative, but we were promised so much with Stay Human. Coming out the other end of the experience with so few memorable moments and characters reframes the choices made along the way to really highlight the shallow world. Sure, this isn't an experience we're having for the first time anymore, but a sequel that promises more story should have more to offer than a chaser to a shot. The tapes! Yeah, there's loads of backstory, but I'm talking about after that. The world we experience. I think the entire Council of Mankind being 10 people in a room is super sick, but I want more of that cool shit in the world we explore. Finally, I want to say that the comparison to New Vegas doesn't imply that every game should be New Vegas, but given how much that game got right on the story side, it should always be at the top of every list of inspiration for games with branching narratives. Obsidian did impressive things with such a limited engine on such limited hardware. But that game also crunched its developers into paste, and I'd never ask for that. I'll take a 2-year delay over a crunch team any day. I don't know who I'm impressing with that line, but some people are pro-crunch, and that's baffling to me. It wasn't until after I beat the game for the 4th time that I finally saw the full scale of potential left on the table and decided to make this video series. It's less about not getting what I wanted, and more about hoping to inspire change for the future. Maybe for the better, if I feel like it. I want more Dying Light with passion. If you ask me, we could stand to spend a little more time in Villador. We don't gotta have a new world space every time we get a new DLC, and each free DLC doesn't have to be limited to a new currency for a new challenge. I'd like to see new factions with new weapons, cultures, stories. I want to see them interacting with the locals in interesting ways. I want to see more of the world, either physically with a new world space, or through the stories and people of the world coming to Villador to either conquer it or survive in it. I want more Dying Light. Given that it's really hard to make merch for this series, the only way I can support it is by buying games in the series and talking about it. I really like Dying Light. I want it to succeed. I think it can be something more, and I want so bad to see that. I'm repeating myself now. Bye.